we will begin. Okay, I do have one-page reference in here before everything broke down. And this is about idealism and realism. What I want to do is sort of state my view of what's going on, which contains in it, I think, a pretty clear and supported by the text layout of things. But there's one part of it that I'm not clear about, but I'll explain that when I get there. But I'm going to do it without citing all the texts which I have to back up all these claims I'm making. And we'll have a discussion, and I'll bring in the texts I need when I need them. First, just because I think it will cause a lot of confusion, in the book you've got, on 497, he says clearly he's not an idealist or a realist. And just to get that out of the way so that doesn't, that only says that there's a certain kind of realist he isn't, and a certain kind of idealist he isn't, and we still have to figure out what in the world he is. But let's read that at the bottom of 497. We were once concerned, that is in the structure of comportment, with gaining and understanding the relationship between consciousness and nature, between the inner and the outer. Or again, the problem was to link the idealist perspective, according to which nothing exists except as an object of consciousness. He doesn't hold that view. He does not hold the view that nothing exists except as an object of consciousness. He's going to get rid of that. And the realist perspective, according to which consciousnesses are introduced into the stuff of the objective world and of events in themselves. Well, that's, I think, means that he's not a reductionist either. When he says realist in that way of talking, he means try to explain consciousness in terms of objective events in the objective world. So he's not going to say just everything that exists only insofar as we in our consciousness exist and constitute it in some way, a view that one might think would be Husserl's, and Husserl defenders aren't here to defend Husserl today, so I think it is Husserl's, and he's not going to be what lots and lots of people are now, a kind of reductionist who thinks, like John Searle, I believe, that in the end, all there is finally physical particles batting around, and we've got to explain everything in terms of them, consciousness, meaning, etc. He's not going to be that kind of reductive realist either. Now, what he is really interesting and complicated, and so here's my story. There are going to be 4 different levels of description. And so the first one is the world as we perceive it. That's this indeterminate perceptual. That's the world as we perceive it is indeterminate. It's always got horizons. It's always given to me from some perspective. That already, I have a quote for that, but I think I even read that quote once. And in a way, he holds that that's the richest of all experience, whatever there is, that's the richest there is. And perhaps he should have held that that's sort of what is ultimately real. I wish he had. But I think it would be interesting. His view is so close to what Rick calls the rich world ontology, namely that the world is very, very rich, and one of the most rich aspects of the whatever the being, you have to say, or something is very rich, and one of the richest takes on it is ours, and we get a lot of the truth of it. But that isn't what he says. We'll get there. Yeah.
And this one word, it's this indeterminate perceptual richness.
Yeah, that's right. I think that this world with its objects, which have always got more about them than we can ever fully discover, which have always got indeterminacy, but nonetheless have a structure and we can explore it. And there are people and bodies and trees and cars and desks and all that. I wish he had just said, that's what's ultimately real, period. And then gone on to talk about sort of aspects of that or something. But he doesn't say that. He does think that there is this perceiving that we do, and then we perceive everything from a perspective. Maybe I will read that, because that's sort of as far as he goes toward this kind of realism of rich world realism. So I don't think you need to even find this, but I read it once before. The world is the field of experience, and we are nothing but a view on the world.
Where is that?
That's 406 of yours. The middle of the page.
472.
Okay, on 472 here. I can tell you where it is on the page when I look it up. That's about 15 lines from the bottom of 472. But then, I mean, that's just where you start. But things get much more complicated. Then there is our perceiving and our view on the world, always perspectival and unfinished and open. And then number 2 is, there is the perceptual world. That's different than the world as we perceive it. That's the shared world on which I've got a perspective and you've got a perspective. And that world has inexhaustible details. And then, now in your book, this is still, 451. This is what? Now, 451 in this book. In this one. Yeah, I mean, the reason, you'll see, I mean, soon things broke down and I couldn't have time to do all the copying, but right here at the beginning I was still able to look in here. So on 451, which is the end of a paragraph, the last 15 lines of a paragraph for you out of it. Say where it begins, our body, the 15 lines before that paragraph. 451 in the old one. No, 451 in ours. And now Alvin's looking for it. Well, I'm going to go on. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to read those 15 lines on 451 in ours. I have had the experience of a real triangle, and because as a physical thing, it necessarily has within itself everything that it has ever been able or ever will be able to display. So now it looks like it's part of the way the physical thing shows up in the perceptual world, is that it's experienced, at least, as having within itself all these determinate characteristics. And then he goes on, unless the perceived thing, see, it's the perceived thing, has for good and ever implanted within us the ideal notion of a being, which is what it is, there would be no phenomenon of being. So there is this is very strange, but it looks like there is, in the world that we perceive, we can't help seeing it as having all these characteristics and completely determinate. It's a good thing he says that, because I swear I do. I mean, I think the desk has got all of its details completely determinate. I think it would be wacky to think otherwise, that it somehow gets determinate when you go around and look for it. None of us want to say that. But I'm not quite sure of the status of this claim. But it looks like it's the cryptomechanism, which is not a bad thing, I think now. The cryptomechanism is the way we are led to extrapolate the way the perceptual world is perceived by us, indeterminate, etc., to the way our experience of the world is indeterminate. We extrapolate that to a shared perceptual world of objects which are completely determinate. That gives us our understanding of being. which I think is equivalent to this thing he says every once in a while, the in itself for us. And, and we actually experience the in itself for us. And it's, and that gives us our understanding that they're a being, where being means everything is either this, has this property or that property, and all of its properties are in. That's what it is for something to be, to have, and so forth. We've really got that. And, but, and now we go on, somehow it's going to turn out that that doesn't actually capture the next thing, which is the natural world. Because the natural world doesn't have this characteristic of having all its properties in, and so forth. Or maybe it does. I mean, I'm telling you what I think. I can't quite figure out, does the natural world, as he's using the term, have being? Well, let's talk about the natural world. The natural world turns out to be absolutely other. But before we get to that, let me just, it's such a weird thing. I do want to read you some quotes. And now, Alva, they'll be in your book, because here's where my references to mine give out for a while. Okay, he opens up a natural world, starting on 24.
Page 24?
Yeah.
That would be page 28.
Okay. And it's very important to see that the natural world is not the same as the world dealt with by science. We'll get that. At the bottom of 28 for you all, we have to discover the natural world too, and its mode of existence, which is not to be confused with that of a scientific object. Okay, so let's find out about that natural world. So there's lots to be said about it. For instance, and this is now 330 in your book, Alva. That's 29 down.
330 is 385.
385 in our book. Okay. That's this mysterious thing which I read about 6 lines down. The natural world is the horizon of all horizons, the style of all possible styles, which guarantees to my experience a given, not a willed unity, a given, not a willed unity underlying all the disruptions of my personal life. Its counterpart within me is the given, general, and pre-personal existence of my sensory functions, in which we discovered the definition of the body. That's one of these crucial statements. So what does it look like? Well, it looks like the natural world is a horizontal thing. So that would look like it's correlative with my body, and it's got a style, and so forth. Now, I sort of sigh, because it's hard for me to figure out how to reconcile that with the notion that the natural world is the absolute other. I don't understand how the absolute other has a horizon, but let's read about the absolute other, because it seems that's really very important to his not being an idealist. If there's an absolute other, it would seem to be even more absolute than a horizon. A horizon is always relative to me. It can't be an absolute other. I mean, somehow, I hope this is coherent, but I must confess I don't see how to put it all together. And that's what I want you all to help do as soon as I lay it out here. Where are we now? I want to look at 432.
My designation?
Yours.
So I think that is 502 of yours.
Okay.
It sometimes misses by a few lines.
I know, so I'm going to go over here also, so I know what I'm talking about over here. 432. Well, it's the paragraph that begins our replies, and it says, at the bottom of that paragraph that begins our replies, what is true taking one thing to another is that there is a nature which is not that of science, but that which perception presents to me. Okay, now, and but how that's supposed to be absolutely other is not clear to me.
Where did you say that? Absolutely other?
Oh, yeah, the absolute other is on 325 of yours. Didn't I give the quote? I'm sorry.
So I think that's 379.
Okay, then let me find that over here. Not quite. Okay, let's see now. What did I say I was? I'm getting too many. 325. Okay, and that's 379.
About 8 lines down.
8 lines down on 379.
380.
380. Ah, that's why we can't find it. Okay, yes. 8 lines, yeah, something like that. That we open ourselves, that is, open himself to an absolute other, which he is making ready in the depths of his being. Okay. Now, that's pretty...
Where is it on 325?
What's that?
I can't find it on 325.
Okay, let me go to...
Oh, yes, I do. It's on 326, actually.
I see. They're a little confused. And let's go right on close to that. 328 in yours. I'll find it in a minute in ours.
It says it's 382.
I doubt it. But let me go over here to 328. If anybody finds more about the absolute other, just yell. Well, it's not. It's another. It's not neither like a horizon quite, nor like an absolute other. It's on 328 of yours, Alva, about 15 lines from the top. And what did you say it was going to be in mine?
328 is 382.
Okay, it's a strange thing here. Back to the horizons and the styles and so forth, about 6 lines down. The style is a certain manner of dealing with situations, and skipping down about till 15 lines down. I experience the unity of the world as I recognize the style. No, that's not altogether, that's not wrong. It's not absolutely other. I do not for the moment but I find this one somewhere, but I do not for the moment doubt that in themselves things have been compatible and compossible because from the very start I am in communication with one being and one only, a vast individual from which my own experiences are taken and which persists on the horizon of my life. Can you find that? You don't find that. Nobody understands where that is. What?
Where's on the old one?
In the old one, it's on 328.
Oh, it is. I see.
Yeah.
So it's 382.
Where is it? Oh, yeah, here it is at the bottom of 382. Oh. A vast individual, about 6 lines from the bottom, exists at the horizon of my life and so forth. Okay, so I'm just trying to say there's this horizon story, and the world is this ultimate horizon, this individual on the horizon of my life, and somehow it's also absolutely other. It's experienced as independent of human beings, as being completely determinate. It's experienced as having being in his language. It's experienced as the in itself for us. Now, you could find that on 293.
Which is 341.
Okay, and now I'll tell you where it is on the page. For you, oh, it's this famous one. We've read it before. I'm just calling your attention to it. It's in the middle of your page 293, and it's here wherever the Place de la Concorde is. Help me find it. The paragraph begins in the same way. Oh, yeah, here we are, the middle of 342. I walk across the Place de la Concorde and find of myself and so forth and so forth. And then you see the surface of the stone and the play of lights, and entirely without history, and the gritty surface and so forth. My total perception is not composed of analytic perceptions, but capable of dissolving them. My body, through my habits, ensures my insertion into the human world, does so only by projecting me in the first place into the natural world. And now the funny, interesting claim, which can always be discerned underlying the other, as a canvas underlies the picture. So that's this natural world of being, and it obviously is supposed to be absolutely, and maybe these two jobs are not incompatible. I mean, it would be there somehow, whether I was around or not. That's the sense in which I think it's absolutely other. But it also shows up in my experience as this ultimate horizon, this gritty surfaces and mountains and stuff underlying my evaluations and my experiences. That's what he wants to say. That the puzzle keeps coming back, and I'm sorry if you're confused, but I'm confused. Just the following, sort of, how much of this natural world structure is there independent of us, and how much of the natural world structure is a co-production, correlative with our bodily capacities? He seems to want to say both. There is a natural world independent of us, which is correlative with our bodily capacities to organize it. Can you make sense of that?
No, I was going to ask a question that seems related about the crypto mechanism, something you said, that we just can't help seeing the world as it is. The crypto mechanism kicks in, and there is a world that is a certain way, and we can't help it.
That's good. I mean, yeah, that's how there is an in itself for us. But that's not the natural world. That's the way we have to perceive the shared perceptual world. But underlying the shared perceptual world is the natural world. And the question I'm asking is, the perceptual world already, and this is what you're saying, has to be experienced as having being, of having determinate properties, even though our way of perceiving it never does. That's what I said earlier. But underlying the perceptual world with its determinate properties, which are clearly relative to us in the sense that we're the ones who see the colors and the shapes and so forth, there is a natural world which is absolutely other, and which, and this is the crucial question, it has whatever character it has, presumably, whether we were around or not. But then, let me say what's puzzling me so you won't get lost. Surely he thinks there is this nature independent of us, and we have to get in the right relation to it to unlock it so that we can have experience of this perceptual world. The question is, how much structure does he think that nature in itself, this absolute other, has? And how much of its structure is a structure disclosed by our activity? And how much of this structure is constituted by our bodily way of organizing it? I can't tell. If you have passages that can, we're going to have to hear them.
The Constitution issue, I think he clearly says several times that we are not constituting the world. He clearly goes against it.
Of course, but I mean that begs the question, because because there is a world that's absolutely other, a natural world, and we don't constitute it. But how much of the structure of that natural world do we constitute? That it's spatial, that it's temporal, that it's got objects in it with colors and sizes. I think he thinks that's all relative to us and our body schema.
He says that we're injected into the natural world because of our habits, though, which means our skill. So we're injected into it because of certain capacities we have to encounter it.
And that's the sort of unlock it thing. But the question, I'll give you quotes. I mean, I wish he would say, and I tried to say this and make up an evolutionary kind of story, that there really is a world of the kind of space and time we experience, and that's independent of us, and then we have this capacity in our body to unlock that, to disclose that, and so forth. But I think when the chips are down, he thinks that all the structure of the natural world is contributed by our body schema, I'll read the quotes, which would leave the natural world there as boundary conditions. That is, we can't just organize it any old way. That's the truth that you're after. I mean, the fact that we can't just organize it any old way, however, doesn't say that we find its structure, and it's this very world of perception. This natural world, which is absolutely other, sets conditions such that one of the ways it can be organized is by our body's schema. But that's not its structure. That's one of the ways that it can be organized, is the way I read it. What do you think?
I'm just asking you a question. What do you mean by the structure of the world? Do you mean a structure that can be articulated by astrophysicists?
Oh, no. I haven't got to the universe yet. That's another step down the line. This is the natural world. He says specifically, it's not the world that science studies.
Can it be articulated, like phenotized in a, like an explanatory sense? I mean,
Oh, not explanatory. No, the natural world can only be thematized by making sense of it as perceptual objects. This is the constitution, or sometimes he says the recomposition, once, of the natural world, as if it had already this structure, and then we have to recompose it and give it this structure. That's an interesting possible view to hold. But so, all I can say is it looks sometimes like he thinks it's just boundary conditions, whose structure, one way of getting in sync with it is our bodily way, and that gives us this world. But that's not what's really there, because if there were no human beings, then there the boundary conditions wouldn't be sorted into this experience. That's one thing. So the boundary conditions that you get in sync with, and you compose this world, organize it, and it works. Or the boundary conditions already have a lot of structure, and all you have to do is get that structure, which you happen to be happily in sync with, given your body schema, and then you disclose this very world, or recompose the way the world really is, the natural world. And I guess those are the two views. Has it got the structure we find in it, or is it the boundary conditions, the absolute other, that just sets a limit on what we can find? Yeah, James.
I'm a bit confused about the relationship between the natural world and the perceptual world. Could you say the natural world underlies the perceptual world?
That's what he says.
I don't understand how the two are distinct.
Good question. I'm not sure I do either. But the perceptual world is we understand it as full of significance relative to our interests and purposes, and the natural world, this gritty stone in the Place de la Concorde, is sort of like it's like secondary and primary qualities, only that would be a very bad way of thinking about it, because, for instance, shape and size are part of what we disclose. All that there is a kind of stony stuff that we can get at when we take it away all of the part of the perceptual world which is historical, cultural, and relative to social, cultural, and significant. That you take that away, you get the natural world.
So the natural world is associated with the action of one, or whatever, and the perceptual world is associated with the individual person?
No, I'm sorry. No, that's not what I meant to say. No, the one already has in it significance, history, sedimented history, and culture. And the one reveals this world, which is full of what it affords to any kind of being like us. But that couldn't be the absolute other. So what is the absolute other? Well, the absolute other seems to be what's left if you take away everything that's relevant to history, culture, meaning, and so forth. And there's going to still be something there, which is what you see in this passage when you see the where are we? Then let's read this some more. And then, a natural non-human space he's talking about. So you walk across the Place de la Concorde, you are engaged by a yellow, gritty surface, and there's no longer even a stone there. That's too much of our interpretation. The play of light upon an indefinite substance. And this my body projects through my habits ensures an insertion into the human world. And it not only projects me in the first place, let's start again. My total perception is not compounded of such analytical perceptions, but capable of dissolving into them. And my body, which through my habits ensures my insertion into the human world, does so only by projecting me in the first place into the natural world, which can always be discerned underlying the other as a canvas underlies the picture and makes it appear insubstantial. Let's see if we need any more. A little toward the bottom of our page, human spaces present themselves as built on the basis of natural space, and so forth. And maybe the top of 343, about 15 lines down, when he's talking about the natural world again, it is so foreshadowed by the horizons of possible objectification, and it frees me from every particular setting only because it ties me to the world of nature, or the in itself, which includes them all. Ooh, includes them all. I don't know what that is. Now, I saw a hand up. That's Eric.
The in itself, when he speaks about the in itself first, is this in itself the same as the absolute other?
I would have thought so.
Yeah,
Okay, I think so. The in itself, well, wait a minute. No. Well, I don't know. I'll tell you the two things that go into my mind. When he talks about the being as this completely determinate, which perception gives us if you extrapolate it, I don't think that's the absolute other. I think that's the shared perceptual world as completely determinate. This very classroom and so forth. That's what you get when you extrapolate all of this to determinate being. But that wouldn't be the natural world, which doesn't have all these properties of being desks and so forth. That's further underlying, and it's got to be a kind of anti-idealism, just to keep all the cards on the table, because it has at least got this property of being the boundary condition, some kind of absolute other, which sets a limit on what you can compose it as or organize it as. Even if all the organization of it is finally up to us, we just couldn't organize it any old way, and we can't organize it simply by consciously trying. There's something in us, namely this shared body schema, and there's something there independent of us in our body schema, and you get them and that's the natural world, and when you put them together, you get this, namely a perceptual world full of meaning and significance and historical and so forth, and a sense that there's something that underlies it, which I think about which you could probably say nothing. I mean, I don't know how far he gets with his gritty yellow surface and so forth. I think finally he gets rid of that too, not even a stone, and so forth. It's, by the way, like Sartre in Nausea. I mean, he starts taking back all the human relative characteristics of the world until you get to the whatever that underlies it all, about which I think he can say nothing finally. What is it he finally says? It's not even a stone, but the play of light upon an indefinite substance. The indefinite substance is this absolute other, is the boundary conditions, is what keeps it from being idealism, because we have to build our perceptual world on the conditions provided by that insubstantial, that indefinite substance. Yeah.
Yeah, at the beginning you said that you had 4 levels of description, so I've got like 3 right now.
That's right. Maybe I should go on to the 4th. But I'll come back to this one. I mean, this is the hardest one. I can understand, I think I can understand, as I said, the way we perceive the world, the shared perceptual world. The natural world is the one I don't get. I'm giving you all the variations. And now I can go into the last one, which is the scientific universe. Should I do that?
Well, okay, I was going to offer an account. But
Oh, no, do this, because I certainly don't want to leave this.
I think an important passage is on 326 of my book, which is 380 of your book, and that's the famous passage where he perceives the pebble in his path.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And he says a lot of things there that suggest to me that he thinks that in our experience of the pebble as a pebble, there is also always the experience of it as a kind of play of light. This is picking up with the isolation core thing. My gaze knows the significance of a certain patch of light in a certain context. It understands the logic of the lighting. Expressed in more general terms, there's a logic of the world to which my body in its entirety conforms. So the thought is that, here's what I propose, that the perceptual world and the natural world are actually the same thing, and that there is some level of sort of indeterminate perceptual experience prior to that. Through the skills which are housed in your body, you can make the mere play of light into something which is determinately there and has hidden parts and is always more than you can see, and that's the natural world. So when he talks about the natural world underlying, what he says in that other passage on my 293 is that the natural world underlies the human world, not the perceptual, the human world, as the canvas underlies the picture. But of course, the canvas is visible when you look at a picture. So they're both present at once.
Well, there's
they're
really...
both dependent on perceptual scope.
Well, I don't know about that. I think maybe that's carrying out the analogy oddly, but I'm not sure. That's interesting. We try that in my... look on 380. Let's see what happens in the light of that. Let's start at the bottom of 379. I just want you to not make a mistake. Yet we reject the idealism involved in the synthetic view because it too distorts our lived-through relationships to things. Insofar as the preceding subject synthesizes the percept, he has to dominate and grasp it through a material perception, to organize and link together from the inside the aspects of the thing. That means that perception ceases, this is his view now, to be inherent in the individual subject, and the thing loses its transparency. So this is how he's sort of not an idealist. You have to be, and now skipping a little, the preceding subject must, without relinquishing his place and his point of view, and in the opacity of sensation, reach out toward things to which he has in advance no key. It's interesting, he sort of has the key to unlock it, but he doesn't have it consciously or anything, but it's in the body schema, I think, for which he nevertheless carries within himself the project. That's the body schema. And open himself to the absolute other, which he is making ready in the depths of his being. I mean, that is, he's alerting the body schema, which is the way the impersonal organization in him seems to take up this and organize the world. Now let me see if I can help connect with Alvin. So you perceive a pebble and you understand all of its sort of perceptual properties when you do that. Let's go to the bottom. Expressed in more general terms, there is a logic of the world to which my body in its entirety conforms. I take it that must be the natural world. Is that what one would think? I mean, that's the thing you're unlocking.
But the moral I'm taking from this is that is that natural world and perceptual world are the same. And I'm not, so that's partly what I think helps as understanding. I'm not sure I see any tension.
The natural world and the perceptual world are the same. Well, let me go on. I mean, if that would solve it, that would be great. there is a logic of the something world, whether whichever it is or the same, to which my body conforms and through which things of interest and sensorial significance become possible for us. Insofar as it is capable of synergy, my body knows the significance of the totality of my experience, of this or that color added or subtracted, and so forth and so forth. And you skip. To have a body possess a universal setting, a schema of all types of perceptual unfolding, and of all those intersensorial correspondences which lie beyond the segment of the world which are actually perceiving. The thing is therefore not actually given, it is internally taken up, reconstituted, I wanted to get to that, and experienced by us insofar as it's bound up with the world. The basic structures of which we carry with us, of which it is merely one of many possible, bound up with the constants experienced by us, so far as it's bound up with our world, the basic structures of which we carry with us, and of which it is merely one of many possible concrete forms.
Well, the point is, maybe there's a difference, a distinction that can be drawn between the perceptual world and the natural world, but it's not one which bears on the idealism and realism contrast. So maybe you want to say that the perceptual world is sort of the shape and color, and the natural world is the sort of whole hiddenness of the whole nature of the thing.
Yeah.
But in both cases, the shape and the color, no less than the oak tree-ishness of the thing, are only made available to us thanks to the body schema.
And available to us, that would be to say that when we do unlock them, we really find out what was there all along. I mean, there are the structures not relative to us in our body. That even if we were here gone and our body was gone, there'd still be these trees and so forth. I don't know, but I fear not. Let me see. We'll go one more sentence. Although a part of our living experience, it's transcendent in relation to our life, because the human body with its habits, which weave around it a human environment, has running through it a movement toward the world itself. And I think there's distinction between this human environment and the world itself. I would have thought the human environment was the shared perceptual world, and the world itself is the underlying whatever, which is. Well, somebody had a hand up. I'm ready to hear from other people. I didn't see a hand up? Okay.
It shows the relation between this natural world and perceptual.
Where? You got a
It's
quote.
actually right after the nebula quote, which I know you.
No, well, I don't care where it is. If you can get these two together so that
502 at the very end of the paragraph.
I have no, on 525.
502 at the very end of the temporality chapter.
Okay, got it.
It says, what is true, taking one thing with another, is that there is a nature, and I to that as the natural world, which is not that of the sciences, it's not the universe, but that which perception presents to me.
Yes.
And I'm trying to link this what, and it goes on to say this, even consciousness can be presented to us as well. What I was trying to say is that the perceptual world, I'm kind of agreeing about it, it's the same as the natural world. But the perceptual world is just a different aspect of describing the world. It's the world insofar as we deal with it with our perceptions. The perceptual world is the natural world as we deal with our perceptions.
And the perceptual world.
This natural world.
No, it isn't an identity. I don't think an identity is something you convinced me of when I asked the question earlier. There has to be something that exceeds the perceptual world that is you can't get to. I mean, it may ground the perceptual world, but it goes beyond the perceptual world. Isn't that the
The perceptual object exceeds what is given.
Yeah.
The passage you were reading, Bert, goes on and actually talks about the natural world when you were reading.
Let's find it. Tell me back. Where were we then?
It was inaccessible.
Well, I would have thought so too, but there's now a consensus which would certainly help. And so we want all these things to fit together. I'd be happy any way they do. That there is the absolute other, there's the horizon of all horizons, there's these are all names for something, there's the perceptual world, there's the natural world, there's, and how to fit all that together, and is the question.
We have to make an important distinction about accessing this natural world, and then talking about one world grounding another. I think for him, we the perceptual world comes first for us in terms of trying to explain the body, explain the phenomena, and to access these phenomena that, like ourselves, our bodies, our limbs. In order for us to understand this, we have to speak to the phenomena, speak to this perceptual world. But that's not to say that there isn't a natural world that you can kind of think of without, perception dealing with it. I mean, it's.
But it's not even.
Not about accessing the natural world, because we can only access it through this perceptual world. But it's not to say that there's not this natural world that we can kind of conceive of.
Yeah.
But it's not.
And the natural world isn't even like stones. I mean, it isn't nature in the sense of the trees and the stones, because the stone gets canceled out in that passage I read, and there's something even more minimally structured in our terms, and that's what puzzles me.
The problem is once you start describing it, you bring in all these human sensations.
That's right. I think we can't describe it. I mean, I'll keep my position just so you can contrast it with Alva's and maybe what Martin's going to say in a minute. But I have a feeling. But my position is you can't describe it. It's just what sets these boundary conditions. Anything you say about it or see in it is already something you see because we've got, you've got, we all share a certain body schema which organizes the world into perceptual objects and so forth. But I'm holding this just in order for you to be able to shoot it down. I don't have any particular love of this position. By the way, what it would be, just so you can see the position I feel driven into, would be very close to Kantian. There would be a kind of thing in itself about which you couldn't say anything except that it's the ground of the phenomena of our shared world, sets the limits on our shared world, keeps us from being able to make this world any way we please, and we get in sync with it thanks to, and now the difference between Kant and Merleau-Ponty, we get in sync with it in Kant thanks to the categories which we have in our transcendental consciousness, which enables us to make a shared phenomenal world out of the impingement from the thing in itself, which sets these limits. And Merleau-Ponty in this reading I've driven to is saying, well, it isn't the categories in the mind that enables us to organize the thing in itself about which we can say nothing. It's a shared body schema which enables us to organize that about which we can say nothing. And the natural world seems, when it's the absolute other anyway, seems to me to be like that. But when the natural world is something, and this is what I think Elvis picked up on and so forth, the horizon of horizons, when the natural world already seems to be full of meaning and relative to us, then it doesn't sound Kantian anymore. Then it sounds like we ought to be able to describe this horizon of horizons. But how we could...
Only insofar as it's perceived. It's perceptual.
Actually, well...
So I would say this natural world isn't hidden behind all these perceptions, but it appears in these perceptions we have.
Okay, it appears...
So I wouldn't say natural world is some limitations or boundaries which you always
Right.
But exactly is that what we get to when we perceive it.
Okay, so let me just say that I
don't know if it's the same as you mean, but...
it's close, I think, to what Alba means. Well, he knows better. But I want to just see if I get it. So there's... When we take this over, thanks to our body schema, and reconstitute it, or as he says at some point, recompose it, there's how we find the structure. I mean, that is the structure of it, which we find.
Insofar as we find it.
What does that mean?
Well, that you can't say more than that. I mean,
okay, that is the structure I see that a being like us finds in it. And, well, that would be the rich world view. I like that. I mean, that would be that there's other kinds of beings might find other things in it. But I've really found a structure in it, which we've revealed when we've gotten in sync with it and organized it. It isn't as if it's ineffable. One of the ways it's effable is this one. And that's what you're saying.
The reason why I said it was to make a difference with Kant, because with Kant you have that
the will somehow is hidden behind the appearances.
Okay, good.
And that's not here the case.
He explicitly addresses, and he says that the natural world is the schema of intersensory type relations.
Yeah.
So he defines it in terms of some kind of sensory regularities. And then he immediately says that that's not to follow Kant.
Okay, where are you?
327. It's actually very much a continuation of what you're reading. In your book, it is 381.
Okay, well that sounds important. Both
If
of
you
you.
just kept on reading, you sort of get
Okay, where should I start? At the bottom of 380 for us, I guess.
Well, like if you go, there's this. Do you see this little break between?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, the sentence I just read is the second sentence after the break.
Oh, after the
Yeah,
break.
yeah.
Okay, well let me get up to the break.
But
and
get
see-
up to the break. Because
Okay.
then also it talks about
Okay.
being thrown into the natural world.
Okay, to have a body is. I read the reconstitutive part. That's about 15 lines from the top of 381.
It may be that he's shifting somebody else's voice here because he starts citing German.
Well, it needs to be excluded then, in the next part, you mean, or right up there, before the break.
Yeah, read up to the break.
I'm going to read up to the break. Everybody read up to the break. Animal behavior and all that. It looks, I mean, this leads to the quote on 385, which we looked at. This makes the natural world the horizon of all horizons. And that seems to make it what Alva and Martin are saying. But wait, let me just say, I don't understand how that could be called the absolute other. That's the thing that bothers me. Because horizon is relative to us. I just don't. The horizon of horizons must be relative to us too. The very concept of horizon is relative to us, and therefore absolute other is what threw me off. Maybe they're just two conflicting tensions, or maybe I'm just supposed to not believe in the absolute other. Maybe it's the seemingly absolute other or something. But or maybe it's, can we try to get the boundary conditions back in, saying that we are sort of, this other would be there whether we unlocked it or not, and it's what's sort of forcing us to disclose it and reconstitute it this way, and we experience in it a kind of receptivity to some order which we don't compose but recompose, and that order is absolutely other, the order that we take up and recompose. I don't know. I mean, you want to say? You look like you want to say something.
I have a couple of things. I guess just to go back to what you guys were talking about, I always interpreted the horizons to be the condition of possibility of our perception. And to me, it seems like the other may just be like these structures that are non-perceptual that we're trying to describe.
Oh, I think horizon, by its sort of the metaphor of horizon, you can only have horizon relative to somebody who's sort of in the middle and of it, and it shapes around them. I can't. I mean, it's how something that was. And this could be both, and I'm trying to keep both. The natural world could be the perceptual world, and understood as a horizon, but also understood somehow as what sort of governs and limits the way we make sense of it. What?
Maybe the natural world can be the conditions of possibilities of having horizons, of there being a perceptual world, of the natural world being able to be perceived.
Yeah, okay, and then you have to say, and you've got two choices. Then it becomes either sort of ineffable, and you're off into Kantianism, or you say, and it governs the way we perceive it because of the way it is. And the way it is what we find out when we get our body schema and perceive it. And there isn't any sort of X, and it would be that way whether we unlocked it or not. I mean, recomposed it or not. I mean, it's got a structure all of its own. I like that. I mean, I wish and maybe he is. Maybe he's that much of a realist.
In Clover, he talks about the world without having natural or perceptual.
Yeah, well, he does that often. That's what's causing a problem.
But he's very specific about it having the cradle of all meanings, direction of all directions here.
Yeah.
On page 500 of our book.
Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4 lines down.
Okay.
It says, hence we've discovered
we discovered with the world as a cradle of meanings, direction, the ground of all thinking. How do we find the ground?
And I know that realism and idealism, he's talking maybe about the empiricist realism or Kantian idealism, but it's still the same point that we've been talking about with the world just being the same, the natural and the perceptual world. I mean, our point we've been trying to make, I think it's...
Well, there's something which is the horizon of our life. We're back to that again, in the primordial unity of our experiences. That sounds like the perceptual world, but it doesn't sound like an absolute other, the horizon of our life and the unity of our experiences. It is no longer the visible unfolding of a constituting thought, so forth and so forth. Okay, let me stop. Well, we'll ask you for the last comment. I don't know.
Just one suggestion, and this is really a speculation.
Yeah.
In the passage that we just read, he talks about animal behavior as directed to a natural setting and as encountering resistance. Or he says Widerstand. And then he talks about human behavior opening up a world. Maybe something about centers of resistance, of Widerstand, is what gives you the notion of an absolute other. There's a way in which you're talking about vision, but if you're an animal, in a certain setting, you're worried about the predator who's going to eat you, or the cliff you're going to fall off of, or the hole you're going to get buried in.
I like that. I like that whatever, there's got to be something that we and animals all have to sort of come up against, which we can unlock as a shared perceptual world with its ultimate horizon.
But what it's trying to do is reconcile the idea of the natural world with the absolute other. And the absolute other is the absolute resistance.
I'm taking that over, right. That's what I meant. I thought you were doing, yes. Whatever it is that we and the animals all come up against as something that limits us, and not just in a negative way, back to what Martin says, but provides us the opportunity on the basis of which we can respond and make order and so forth. Maybe that's the absolute other, understood. Not as just a bad kind of resistance, but as affordances too. I mean, resisting and affording to us and to animals. That's the bottom level. And then there's this world, perceptual, shared, cultural, human world that we get when we deal with that. Okay, you get one comment, and then I'm going to have to see
Yeah,
what
well,
this
it's
time is
completely
going on.
related, but I remember for Heidegger in The Origin of the Work of Art, he has this, I'm going to try and paraphrase what he said. He says the world whirls, every so once in a while the earth juts into or explodes itself through into the world.
I think, let me interrupt you, I think that's probably a very useful thing to say, except I suspect nobody here will help anybody because they don't know about Earth.
Saying with the kind of the natural world kind of coinciding with the perceptual world, and every so once in a while kind of revealing itself.
Well, if you knew what Heidegger meant by Earth in The Origin of the Work of Art, which is, I think, equally mysterious. I mean, I'm afraid it explains the obscure by the more obscure. You see that it's exactly the same thing. They struggle. The Earth struggles with world would be like in Merleau Ponty, the natural world struggles with the perceptual world. Okay, I want to take the last 5 minutes to do the fourth level. I'd feel very bad if I didn't get beyond this level. And so let me do it. The objective universe. Now, there are two sort of parts under that. The objective universe is something that the human sciences and the neurosciences presuppose. Well, let me try to find a general statement. The objective universe is what science is trying to describe and get the structure of. It's completely determinate. Presumably it's got elementary particles in it and they're obeying causal laws and so forth. Now, Merleau-Ponty, then this divides into two parts. Merleau-Ponty thinks that, first, you can't explain consciousness and perception and significance in terms of the natural universe. And that's what's wrong with the human sciences who try to, as he puts it, repress or forget perception, and then empiricism will try to give you a story in the human sciences, and so will intellectualism, which tries to find some objective, independent elements and laws in terms of which to explain everything. And then neuroscience does it on another level, tries to get an account of the brain, which explains significance, holism, indeterminacy, consciousness, and everything. And Merleau-Ponty has the sensible view, I think, that that's just, we shouldn't believe that. That's reductionism, the idea that you can explain consciousness and significance and the holism of the way of the perceptual world in terms of any elements, the empiricist elements, the intellectualist elements, the physicist elements, and I think he would hold like Tom Nagel, whom I mentioned. There is just no third-person account possible of this meaningful first-personal way of experiencing the world that we've got. But I think, and now comes the last move I want to make, I think he feels that he needs a stronger argument than that. That just sounds dogmatic. There's Nagel versus Searle. And there's probably another whole list of people you could put on Nagel's side and a whole list of people you could put on Searle's side. One of them says they're going to explain it all in terms of the particles and laws finally. That's all there really finally is what physics tells us there is. And that's the objective universe. And the other side says, no, the objective universe is somehow, for some reason or other, incapable of explaining everything. Now, I think that that's right, but there's a wrong way of trying to defend it. I think Merleau-Ponty feels he needs an argument why it's that the physical universe is incapable of defending us. Of explaining our world and our kind of experience. And then I think he makes the absolutely wrong move that Searle sees he makes and blames him for, but I don't think he should have made it, and where Searle thinks this is what any phenomenologist is going to make, this wrong move, I think you don't have to make it. But the wrong move is to say, well, science is really some kind of abstraction. It's not getting at I mean, it's not getting at what there really is in the universe, so naturally it can't explain significance and consciousness and so forth. At 468, in ours now, at the top, he's saying this. See, I don't know what the right way of saying that science is limited and can't explain meaning and significance. I think probably the thing to say is we don't know yet whether it can or not. We haven't got an argument that's convincing. The argument that's not convincing is that you can, where is it, 468 top. We are led by it, much as the realist believes he is subject to the determinism of phenomenology. He's saying, that's not very helpful. You can't believe in, maybe it's this book, because that wasn't very interesting. Let's try this. 468. No, I don't know what I meant here. But let me tell you, natural science, he says, is an abstraction from the natural world. He says this on 351. See, what? In your book.
That would be 409.
Okay, 409. Let's look. Yeah, right. And this is this important Nagel-like quote on the middle of 409. I don't know whether the abstraction is, but how significance and intentionality could come to dwell in molecular edifices or cells can never be made comprehensible, and here Cartesianism is right. And then skipping down, the body as a chemical structure or an agglomeration of tissues is formed by a process of impoverishment. That's a very important line. You can hear that two ways. One way, it's absolutely right. You've got to leave out a lot of what there is to say about the body to describe the physical body as a machine with tissues and so forth. But there's nothing wrong with that. It's only when you use the idea that science is a very impoverished version of the rich world, and the scientific objective body is a very thin impoverishment of the lived body. When you use that to argue that somehow you couldn't, from these elements, explain the richer stuff. It depends on how you hear this impoverishment. If you hear it, yes, you leave out a lot, and what you finally get is Cartesian space and particles and laws. That's right. But nothing follows from that about what you can explain, except that you've got a lot of explaining to do because you've left out meaning and significance and the body schema and all that, and that may well be impossible to explain. But you can't claim just because science has found this minimal level of description that it couldn't explain everything. But that's what he concludes. That's the trouble. This is where I think he goes wrong. On 391 of yours, Alvin. Yeah. Okay, my book, what?
I think you're 455.
455. Okay, I'm going to go very fast over this because you guys need time to write. He just becomes, the next move, besides saying science is an impoverishment, is to say science is just a social construction. At that point, you've gone beyond saying that it's a very thin objective universe that science talks about, which doesn't prove what you can and can't explain, to there really isn't any universe that science is talking about. It's a construction. That's what he says, and that's where he just goes wrong. He has a strong argument, all right, but I don't see why we should believe it. At the top of 455, he says, prosaic and scientific utterance is a cultural entity which at the same time lays claim to translate a truth related to nature in itself. Now we know that this is not the case, for modern criticism of the sciences has clearly shown the constructive element in them. Well, that's to make what Searle calls it as confusion between epistemology and ontology. That's to say that the way we know about scientific entities, which of course depends on language and lots of scientific practices in laboratories, that's somehow intrinsic to what the scientific entities are, that they are constructions. Whereas all you want to say, if you want to be true to the phenomena and so forth, all you have a right to say, that's the way to put it, is that if it weren't for our languages and our scientific practices, we couldn't have access to the entities that science discovers. Now, maybe it's true that what we get access to is really not discovered, but somehow constituted by this access. But it doesn't follow from the fact that you need science and laboratory practices to talk about electrons and nebulae, that electrons and nebulae are cultural products. That's what he finally says with this outrageous passage on wherever it is that I always get upset about at the end of the time chapter, 502, where he talks about Laplace's nebula about 2/3 down. It's not behind us, but is in front of us in the cultural world. And I guess I've got to stop really, but let me just see if I... Yeah, so I think that he is an idealist about scientific entities. There's no doubt about it. He thinks they're constructed, and he thinks that if we weren't here, there couldn't be any electrons and galaxies and so forth. I think that's just wrong. But that's not the interesting issue. He could fix that. What we really want to know is the stuff we spend most of the time discussing, what this natural world is and how it's independent of us, and how he's neither an idealist nor a realist about the perceptual natural world. I got to stop with that. Okay.